Hello, and welcome to the ReImagination Café Podcast. I'm Jessica Cherry. So I loved day camp. First and foremost, it was at Weehawken Day Camp in Ohio where I first laid eyes on a horse, a beautiful paint named Blaze. When I looked into those big, soulful brown eyes, it was love at first sight, and that was it. My life would never be the same. Blaze would be the first in a long line of horses who I would love with complete and total abandon, and who would return that love unconditionally, no strings attached. There were other things I loved about camp too. Skinny dipping in the lake, sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories with the crackling sound of the fire in the background, playing in the mud with friends and getting so filthy that we had to be hosed down before getting on the bus to head home. Sometimes when I'm sitting at my desk staring at my computer screen, I find myself thinking back to those days, standing barefoot in the mud, feeling totally alive and connected to the world around me. There's actually a whole network of people who've built their work around the idea that being close to nature can heal and connect us. These care farmers, as they're called, use a wide array of therapeutic farming practices to promote health, well-being, inclusion, and belonging, and to support various populations that may be marginalized, undersupported, or overlooked. Whether it's people with disabilities growing vegetables, or people with substance use or mental health challenges taking care of rescued animals, the reciprocal benefits of these care farms are truly remarkable. Now, the biggest challenge of care farmers, at least until recently, has been developing these new and innovative programs without a roadmap and without their own community of support. That's where the Care Farming Network comes in. An outgrowth of Red Wiggler Care Farm in Maryland, the Care Farming Network has become the coalescing body that these farmers so desperately needed, providing them with a place to share resources, discuss their trials and tribulations and successes, and just generally benefit from each other's wisdom. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that these care farmers are a generous lot, eager to share their knowledge to help others achieve their mission. My guests today play different but overlapping roles in the care farming movement. Woody Woodroof is the founder of Red Wiggler Care Farm, which has been providing meaningful employment to people with disabilities and supplying vegetables to the local community for 30 years. Woody will share the unexpected path that led him to Red Wiggler, a story that is illustrative of the kind of creative, out-of-the-box thinking that is characteristic of so many care farmers. Kate Mudge is the co-director of the Care Farming Network. After living and working in St. Paul, Minnesota for most of her career, in 2020, Kate and her wife Amy decided to leave city life behind and move to a farm in rural Ashby, Minnesota. So in addition to introducing us to the work of the Care Farming Network, she'll have a lot to share about rediscovering that connection to nature, which for many of us can feel somewhat elusive in the world we're living in today. Now, I also had the chance to connect with a few other people who are deeply involved in care farm programs, and we'll share clips from those conversations, each of which provides a unique story about how therapeutic farming is being used to heal and transform lives. And I promise that these stories will really bring today's discussion to life. So a lot to get to today, so let's get to it. Kate, Woody, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So to get us started, Kate, I'm curious, with so many unique approaches that fall under the care farm umbrella, how does the Care Farming Network define care farming?
So Care Farming Network defines care farming as using therapeutic farming to promote health, well-being, and belonging. And I think one of the simplest approaches to defining care farming is to clarify what care farming isn't. So care farming is not just a traditional farm, and while farming is at the heart of it, care farms provide structured and intentional programs focused on things like well-being and health and healing. Care farms have a clear mission that often will focus on inclusion and social impact and the growth of the participants there. Care farming is not this exclusive model. There's a wide variety of approaches, no one size fits all way to integrate agriculture and health and social benefits. And it's also not just a one-way service. You've got this mutual engagement happening. So participants are potentially receiving help. They might have a treatment plan, but they are also contributing to the farm's activities. So the staff and the volunteers and the participants are having this two-way collaboration where everybody is receiving these benefits from being a part of a care farm.
So a lot to unpack there, and we'll dive into each element you described throughout the episode. But what's clear is that care farming isn't just one thing. It's a dynamic approach with many facets. For example, you have care farms where people with intellectual and developmental disabilities grow vegetables. Care farms where veterans engage in beekeeping. People with substance use or mental health challenges work with rescued animals. People in under-resourced communities interact with goats or donkeys. The list goes on and on. And while we couldn't possibly go into detail about each type of care farm, there are far too many. In a few minutes, Kate, I'm going to ask you to provide a general overview of some of these models, and then we'll do a deeper dive on a few of them. And we'll also play clips from my conversations with some remarkable folks who run some of these care farm programs. But first, Woody, let's turn to you. And let's start with the care farm that you founded, Red Wiggler, which was one of the earliest models and which served as the launch pad for the care farming network. So Woody, you've been at the helm of Red Wiggler, providing meaningful employment to people with disabilities and growing vegetables for your community for 30 years. So can you give us an overview of the model you've developed at Red Wiggler?
We grow on about 5 acres of land in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a bedroom community of Washington, D.C. We have 18 individuals on our payroll with developmental disabilities that come for a variety of lengths of time during the week. Some people work 5 hours a day for 5 days a week. Some people work 2 hours twice a week. It depends on the person and the jobs that are available. Everyone gets paid minimum wage or better. And in Montgomery County, Maryland, we're talking about $17 an hour. And we've always adhered to that. We've always paid our folks minimum wage or better. So on any given day during, say, the late spring, early summer, we have volunteers that come from schools to get their service learning hours. The state of Maryland requires service learning hours for graduation. And those people come and work side by side with our growers and our staff to produce great, healthy, organic vegetables for our community. Today, 50% of our total yield we distribute to food banks and pantries through our Farm to Food Bank program. So 50% goes to low-income households who are food insecure, and the other 50% we sell through our community-supported agriculture program. I'm happy to say that we are the second longest running, continuously operating CSA in the state of Maryland.
And for anyone who may not know what a community-supported agriculture program or CSA is, this is a subscription program where customers purchase shares of the farm's harvest upfront, say in January or February, so farmers have the capital they need to cover their operating expenses. And then the customers receive regular deliveries, or they can pick up their vegetables throughout the farming season.
That's right.
And how is Red Wiggler structured? Is it a nonprofit?
We have a model that is very unique. We are a 501c3 nonprofit and have been since, year 2. And so we receive charitable donations and grants to help support this effort. But we also make money the old-fashioned way by selling the produce that we grow and harvest and distribute to the community.
And the Care Farming Network is really an outgrowth of Red Wiggler. Word spreading quickly about this little farm that was making a big impact. Can you explain how that happened?
The Care Farming Network is a natural outgrowth of people, thanks to the internet, learning about what this teeny little farm in Maryland's doing, hiring adults with developmental disabilities to grow and sell vegetables, and to distribute them to food banks and pantries, but also to paid customers through a CSA program. So people would see this on the internet and they go, wow, I want something either for their child or their brother or sister, or perhaps a church that wants to run a program or a nonprofit that wants to expand programming for day services. So it was a trickle at first, but within 5 years, really when the internet hit around 99 or so, I would get these calls from people from all over the country and emails and eventually, and people wanting to come and tour the farm and see how it works and whether they could implement a program in their neighborhood, in their city, in their state.
So you and your team spent a lot of time talking to people about what you were doing. And then there were others doing similar kinds of things, but you weren't really connected to each other, right?
We go to farming conferences and we're sort of the stepchild there because we're a nonprofit and they're all for profit. So we don't really fit in. We go to disability conferences and they're like, what? You're running a business? You don't get state support? And we're like, no. So we always felt like we never really fit in. And I always thought, well, gosh, I know of the Camp Hill communities throughout the country. I think there's 7 Camp Hill communities which were doing care farming before we had that term. There was an outfit in Tucson I had heard about, various places around the country, but we were not sharing our stories, our trials and tribulations and successes. We felt like there was a community that needed to be linked up.
And so you'd been mulling this over. And then one day your farm manager, Andrea Barnhart, comes to you and says, hey, you know that thing we've been talking about? I'd kind of like to work on that.
That's right. And I was like, great. And Andrea and her team developed this care farming network. And we got a USDA grant, 3-year grant to really push it forward. Really grateful for that. We've got some private funding that's making it happen. And we've got a really solid team that's advancing care farming in the United States.
And of course, we have a key member of that care farming network team right here. So Kate, let's turn to you. And why don't you tell us about the role of the care farming network today?
Absolutely. Our role is really about building bridges and making connections between care farmers. So we help people start care farms. We support them through mentorship, through sharing experiences, connecting them with resources and other care farmers who are generous enough to share their advice and experience. A big part of what we do is raising awareness. So we host events like our annual national conference, online education series. We just hosted our 3rd year of the Beginning Care Farmer series. We have monthly member gatherings and farm tours and member meetups. And then we also have this really neat online resource library, and we are continuing to build this so that people can visit our website and learn about care farm research and how to get started and best practices, and even getting down into nitty-gritty topics like what type of adaptive farm tools you can use if you have a physical disability. So our ultimate goal is to create and build this supportive community for care farmers that draws on all of our knowledge.
And we'll talk more about the critical role that the care farming network plays in bringing so many people together, sharing resources and providing much needed support for people who are oftentimes developing these very innovative care farms without a lot of precedent to draw from. But first, Woody, I'd like to rewind a little bit and ask you to tell us about the genesis of Red Wiggler. So you founded Red Wiggler in 1996, and while you're always quick to point out that you were not the first person to do this kind of work, there were other precursors to Red Wiggler, the Camp Hill communities, for example, which you've mentioned, and a few others. But Red Wiggler was certainly one of the earliest, and perhaps the first in the United States, to actually call itself a care farm. So Woody, can you share the really wonderful backstory behind Red Wiggler, a story that is both unique and unexpected?
Unexpected, yes, that's a good word. I guess 31 or 2 years ago, I was a starving artist. I have a art degree from a small liberal arts college, and you graduate and all of a sudden you're out on your own. And well, I ended up working in restaurants and washing dishes. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, but I was living in Tucson, Arizona, and getting these low wage restaurant jobs that I really didn't enjoy. And I read in the classifieds that I could work helping people with developmental disabilities on the weekends. So Friday through Sunday, I would get 40 hours and I got paid about the same amount as I would be getting paid washing dishes. And I was like, great, I get to hang out with people over the weekend and cram 40 hours into 3 days so I could do my artwork the rest of the time. Was really the motivation is a little better job, at least socially, and then having time for my own artwork. Well, within 2 or 3 days, the first weekend of work, I was like, oh my gosh, these people are fascinating to me. I really like these people.
Right, right, right.
I like this job. I would like to get better at it.
And where was this? Was this job on a farm or was this job somewhere else?
This was working in a group home.
So this is the early 1990s, when group homes were intended to provide a community-based home-like environment that promoted greater independence and more dignity for people with disabilities and to integrate them into their communities, provide a sense of belonging, unlike the institutional model that had existed previously. And Woody, what were your impressions?
I noticed a couple of things. The people that I was working with or for needed something meaningful to do during the day. And they were really being shuttled around in a van from one public restroom to another. People were being transitioned out of institutions and into more group home environments in neighborhoods, which is great. But the powers that be didn't really know how to do it. They were building the airplane in the air. And so I felt like meaningful work. And also, parallel to that was you had to take these classes to learn how to give medications properly. So no one got the wrong medication. I was like, wow, these people are taking a lot of medicine, but they're eating sugary, boxed, canned foods, simple stuff to prepare that was not healthy. And I grew up as an athlete. I played sports all through high school and into college. And I knew that what I put into my body really affected my performance.
So you recognized a need for change. And what was your initial vision or concept for what that change would look like?
So it was two parts: access to meaningful work or meaningful activities that are in an inclusive environment. And secondly, access to healthier foods. And the original concept was to create community gardens. And Tucson's in the desert. And I had this idea of a day program where we would drive around in a van pulling a trailer and we would pick up coffee grounds and leaf clippings and compost materials. Because in Tucson, in the desert, the soil, the local term for it is caliche, which is an engineering term in Spanish that essentially translates to concrete. So good luck growing tomatoes in concrete. The idea of composting was the central part of this idea of transformation of plots of land within the desert in Tucson to produce healthy vegetables. And we were going to set up these community gardens in different communities around the city and essentially try to bring together the community in this community gardening atmosphere where we would provide the fertility and we would make it available to the members of the community. And I got super excited about this.
And I know you talked to a lot of people about this idea and even got someone you met at a hotel bar to give you $10,000 in seed money. And so at that time, in addition to working at the group home, you were also working as a photographer. So while you're thinking about all of this, you get a couple of photography gigs back on the East Coast. Money's tight, so you need a place to crash in between gigs. And somewhat fortuitously, you end up on the couch of some friends who happen to live on a farm. And what happened next?
It was Labor Day weekend, 1995. And I got there and I realized that my friend Reed and Nancy, they were running this CSA. This was really in the early days, and nobody really knew what CSAs were. And I was like, wow, this is very different because this is a business that we could get into. I was going to do this community garden thing, but this really works. And it's hot in Tucson. I'd really love to get back to the East Coast.
Right?
And so immediately saw, oh, you've got captive customers. You're going to have 30 families that are tied to you throughout the growing season or harvest season, really. And what a great way to introduce people with developmental disabilities to their customer, because it's not a different customer every week, it's the same customer. This is how we create relationships in our communities, is the repetitive interactions over something that is not about what sort of disability we may have. It's about, I want the food you're growing. I'm willing to pay for it. And I'm really interested to hear your perspective on how the season's going. What crops are doing well, what crops are not doing well. So it diverts the conversation to what we do, what our profession is. And that just, I saw it all in a flash, like, oh my gosh.
You had a vision of what you wanted.
There's a term for it. I can't remember the name of it, but it's when you hit your groove and you're in your lane and all of a sudden doors start to open.
I call it stepping into your purpose. And when you do that, you often experience a lot of synchronicity, I think.
Well, that sure did happen. So I was needing a couch to sleep on, and it turned into something else. My friend was moving. The family that owned the farm, the Morgans, they were retired and they wanted their land farmed organically and access to produce. And they were constantly needing to rehire farm managers to do the organic farming on their 100-acre farm in Maryland. And immediately I was like, well, that's better than the idea I had. I really like this and I want that job. And I interviewed with them and I pitched them by showing them my photography portfolio.
So with no farming experience, but a lot of passion and what must have been an extraordinary photography portfolio, you convinced the Morgans to hire you.
They saw the passion I had. And they really took a leap of faith that perhaps this guy could pull it off and that they could get behind the idea of running a CSA as a framework for training programs for people with developmental disabilities. So they offered me the job and I accepted.
And I've heard you mention that at the beginning of the CSA movement, most of the CSA programs compelled the customers to volunteer at the farm. And I know you did that at Red Wiggler. So you have your growers, people with disabilities, developing friendships, relationships with members of the community who they might not otherwise have met, and vice versa.
That's right. We didn't have terms like diversity back then, but we do now. Diversity makes us stronger.
100%. And of course, 30 years later, while no longer at the Morgans farm, not only are you still going strong, your impact is expanding across the country. Now, I just want to pause for a moment and highlight a few things about the story you just told, Woody. So one of our themes at the ReImagination Café is creativity. We've had a lot of artists on the show, but my favorite definition of creativity comes from the late Steve Jobs, who said that creativity is just connecting things. And Woody, from realizing that the people with disabilities that you met in that group home needed more meaningful work and healthier food, to your original idea of composting and creating community gardens in Tucson, and then when you learned about CSAs, immediately recognizing how that model could serve as a framework for providing job training and employment for people with disabilities while also serving the local community. You made so many connections between things, exhibited so much creativity. And Kate, this is something I've heard you talk about, that care farmers tend to be very creative thinkers.
Yeah, that is true. There's a lot of artists in the care farming space. Woody is a fantastic, well, you're like a jack of all trades with all sorts of artists. I just bought the most beautiful piece of art that Woody created when I was just at the farm. And I think that speaks to the fact that there's not really a roadmap for care farmers, and maybe those with a little bit more artistic inclination give themselves more space and creativity to do something, and just kind of having to make do with what you've got because you're not getting prompts from a whole lot of other places.
Absolutely. So, Woody, one of the things you've talked about quite a bit is the reciprocal learning that happens at Red Wiggler, where you have people with and without disabilities working together on the farm. And also how surprised some people are when they come to the farm and realize just how much they can learn from the farmers, the folks growing the vegetables at Red Wiggler, many of whom are people with disabilities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Back in the 90s, I was a practicing Tibetan Buddhist, and I really believed in this concept that all our interactions with people and the environment, these are teaching opportunities, learning opportunities, opportunities to develop patience, opportunities to broaden our being, really. We have the opportunity to learn from the people we interact with. We really consider our growers as teachers. They know how to do things. They know how to string tomatoes. They know what a ripe tomato looks like versus an unripe tomato, and so on. There's a myriad things that they know. And we have these volunteers that come out to the farm. We're outside of DC. Some of them are fancy private schools. These kids come out here thinking, oh, I'm going to teach Johnny how to, I don't know what. And they quickly realize that people with intellectual or developmental disabilities are teaching them how to do something that they have no basis for understanding, and they need that person to teach them in order to accomplish the task. And so it's flipping the tables that these people often think they're volunteering to help somebody out when the underlying motivation for us is to say, hey, you can learn from anybody. Don't make those judgments. We, of course, don't tell them this. We let them figure it out on their own.
And I think that's a good segue into a conversation I had with one of your employees, Charley Schwartz, who is a perfect example of someone who has a lot to teach others and really enjoys doing it. But before we play that clip, Woody, can you tell us a little bit about Charley?
Charley, he started with us volunteering while he was still in high school. But very quickly afterwards, we realized that he needed a job. And so we suggested that he apply for a grower position. And we didn't really know him that well in the beginning. But the team that was touring around with him said, well, what do you want to do? What kind of career would you like to get into? What kind of job is your dream job? And Charley said, I want to be a tour guide. And we were like, that's awesome because we need tour guides here. We have all these people coming to learn about what we do and observe, or people that come that want to fund us and they're doing their site visit. Any number of people come to the farm that need a tour. And we really want somebody with a developmental disability giving those tours. That's Charley today. A couple of years later, he gives a great tour. And he does the real work of planting seeds, cultivating them, harvesting that vegetable, and providing it to customers and to food banks and such. And the idea that he can be a farmer and a tour guide is just so cool, I think.
Agreed. And here's that clip from my conversation with Charley. So, Charley, how long have you worked at Red Wiggler, and what job do you have?
So this is my 5th season working on the farm. My title here is the educational leader for the educational program that we run here. We do school tours. We also do tours for corporate groups, colleges, schools, and sometimes the USDA comes out and volunteers and sometimes also gets a little mini tour.
What is it about being a tour guide that you enjoy so much?
I love people. I love the interaction that we have. I like the part where if people have questions, they can just shout it out and I can just answer so everyone can hear. And I can also say, hey, feel free to just shout out a question. I can answer it. Let me do that, and you guys will learn a little bit more.
So teaching other people about the farm is important to you?
Right. Teaching people about the farm, how we work, how we do things, what we've been doing, maybe some small facts thrown in there.
Tell me about the friends you've made while working at Red Wiggler.
I've made a lot of friends. Most of them are my coworkers. Working on this farm has been really nice. The inclusivity part is where you get the bond over random things. So, say you're harvesting kale. You can ask questions like, what's your favorite movie? What kind of songs do you like? That kind of thing. Kind of learn more about that person. It's a really cool way to bond because it's not over a digital screen or a video game. You're in the field, talking to a real person, picking real things, doing real jobs while you're working and talking.
So, Charlie, why do you think care farming and providing more people with access to care farms is so important?
I think that it's so important because it helps with those sanctuary safe spaces where people are heard and seen, because a lot of people that have intellectual and developmental disabilities aren't being seen or heard, and they're just kind of existing in a way that makes them feel lonely or not seen because no one wants to hire them because they might think they're weird or they're just out of the ordinary.
So how would you describe the work environment at Red Wiggler for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, or for anyone?
Everybody is seen, doesn't matter who you are or what walk of life you came from. You are seen, know that you are loved, you're seen, you are heard. And it's all about inclusivity, equality, and all kind of mingling together, creating a safe environment for people to feel confident in.
How would you describe what this job and this community means to you personally?
It means everything to me. I love nature and I love working with nature and with other people. So this is my go-to area for literally everything. It's my safe haven, is what I would describe it as.
Charlie, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's really actually hard to listen to without choking up. I mean, you are seen, you know you're loved. I mean, he's saying that about his workplace.
To hear him talk about being heard, the being heard happens in the gaps. It happens over lunch. It happens at break time. It happens when you're picking beans across the aisle from another person.
Right, and Woody, I love the language you used there. The being heard happens in the gaps. I think that's a really good reminder for all of us to make good use of those gaps, whatever they might be, in whatever workplace setting, because it's those small moments at the water cooler, in the hallway, on a Zoom call waiting for others to join, that shape a workplace's culture and whether people feel seen, heard, and like they belong. Okay, so we've spent a fair amount of time talking about Red Wiggler because it's such a fascinating origin story, because it highlights one very important care farm model, and also because Red Wiggler laid the groundwork for the care farming network, which has now grown to include over 350 care farms nationwide. What's somewhat unique, though, is that your approach to growth has not been to try to replicate Red Wiggler or to center only on people with disabilities, although several care farms do. So Woody, can you explain how you've approached growth across the care farming network?
Yeah, I did have this concept of having more farms early on. We were on private property, and I knew that one day that was going to sunset. So even from day one, I was always looking for other properties, and ultimately we landed on a county park with a long-term lease. So the idea of having it be Red Wiggler Farms with an S was there from the beginning, but it really evolved over time. I mean, on one hand, you can't replicate what we've done at Red Wiggler. It's not the same soil, it's not the same climate, It's not the same unique people with everything that they bring to the table. What you can replicate is your response to your land, to your people, to your community. How you respond by listening to what the land wants to grow, how you respond to what the people need. You can replicate the concept, but it's not going to look the same anywhere. And if it does, then I think we're missing our mark because we're not listening to what's happening and unfolding in front of us. Our culture wants us to grow and expand and multiply and duplicate and all of that.
Scaling. Yeah, you always hear about scaling.
A lot of board members, I'm really good at scaling up things.
Right.
And I was like, well, wait, what makes this really special is that we're small, that we really know each other. We bring in community members and build community, and it's the small nature of the community that makes it work so well. What I'd really rather see is let somebody else take a concept. Doesn't have to be a CSA and a food bank farm. It could be animal therapy, animal care, like caring for horses that are retired, any number of things. I'd love to see the concept be carried forward in a lot of different venues, modalities, and let the local community and their particular needs shape these care farms.
Right. So expanding or scaling, but in a very intentional and very customized way, making care farms more accessible to more people while preserving the personal connections and the unique benefits that come from a more intimate setting. So now that we've got a pretty good understanding of Red Wiggler, and thank you, Woody, for that, let's turn our attention to some of the other types of care farms that are out there. So Kate, can you give us a sense of the range of care farms that exist? And then we'll do a deeper dive into 2 care farms where I was lucky enough to speak with the extraordinary people who run them.
Yeah, we have over 350 care farms in our network, and there's such a breadth to them. The models that care farms have are as diverse as their farming practices. So one of the models is employment and job training. That's where you're going to offer work or job skill training to those on your farm. Others lean into a therapeutic model. So that's where you're going to create space for people who are experiencing grief or those overcoming substance use disorder. And you are providing comfort and connection in this rhythm of farm life. Another model is licensed therapy farms. That's where certified mental health professionals integrate farming into treatment, say for trauma, substance use, recovery, depression. And then we have life-sharing communities where people are living and working together on the farm. And that can look like a residential farm for youth with addiction, or women who are coming out of prison, needing housing, post-incarceration. So no matter what type of farming practice is involved, these models are all intentionally creating these spaces where people can heal and feel the social inclusion and connection to farming.
I found it really interesting that there are some care farms that are not rural. There was one in Philadelphia that I saw on the network list that really piqued my interest called the Philly Goat Project.
Yeah, Philly Goat Project operates out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They provide education, therapy, job training, community engagement through goats.
And there's just something about goats, right?
Goats are just such characters. They're very expressive. They bring a lot of laughter to people.
Mm-hmm.
They have very unique personalities that also allow the kids to just sort of have their unique, fun personalities with them too. So the social connection piece, the access to nature. These are kids that are going out and they are literally walking goats through Philadelphia. So experiencing a goat is a lot of fun for kids that might not have ever had any kind of interaction with a farm animal.
And oh my goodness, the pictures on the website, we'll definitely share a few on Instagram. If you don't live in Philadelphia, they'll make you want to get in your car and drive there right away. And there are so many other examples. There's Simple Sparrow Farm in Texas, founded by Jamie Tanner, which specializes in trauma-informed care. Elderflower in North Carolina, founded by Annie Spindler, which offers a holistic multi-generational adult day camp for seniors with dementia, as well as their caregivers, so important as the population ages. There's Tender Loving Care Farm in Alabama, founded by Dr. Jean Keel, which provides transitional housing and life skills training for homeless and healing veterans who grow vegetables at the farm. We could go on and on. And I really want to encourage everyone to go onto the Care Farming Network website, where you can find a map of all these different care farms and you can drill down and find out more about any of them. But to really bring everything to life, Kate and Woody, you were kind enough to introduce me to a few care farmers in your network, Adam and Lacey Ingrao, who operate BeeWise Farms in Michigan, where they do therapeutic beekeeping and have done a lot of work with veterans and their families. Adam himself is a fourth-generation veteran. And then Shawn Hayden, the CEO of GAAMHA in Massachusetts, which operates a care farm as part of its substance use treatment program for people in recovery. And so just as Woody, you and Charlie provided us with a wonderful window into Red Wiggler, I really wanted to offer our listeners the opportunity to get a deeper understanding of a few other models. And first, I have to say that I was scheduled to have pretty short conversations with these folks. I know they're really busy. I didn't want to impose on their time too much. And in both cases, we went way over the time allotted. And everybody was just so incredibly generous with their time and clearly so passionate about their work. So while we can't play each of those conversations in their entirety, or we'd have a 3-hour podcast, we are going to post the full, only lightly edited versions on our website. And everyone listening will see right away just how much knowledge and how much passion each of these individuals brings to their work. So we're going to start with Adam and Lacey Ingrao. And Kate, can you tee that up for our listeners by telling us a little bit about Adam and Lacey and the work they do at BeeWise Farms?
Yeah, Adam and Lacey have a diversified vegetable farm, lavender farm, and they work with veterans through therapeutic beekeeping at their apiary. Adam and Lacey both have a practice that they use that before you even enter the apiary, you take stock of where you're at and intentionally enter calmly, because bees respond to calm and you will not get stung. Well, hopefully you will not get stung when you're moving slowly with intention. And many of the veterans with PTSD, with anxiety, have to relearn that intentional slowness and rhythm with the bees. And that rhythm helps the veterans step outside of their trauma into something more generative that lasts long after they leave that apiary. And they're learning from hives. They're taking cues from this colony of bees. And it's just incredible.
And here's that clip. So Adam, Lacey, thank you for being here. And to start, why don't you provide us with an overview of BeeWise Farms?
Yeah, well, BeeWise Farms started 10 years ago, and we're a small diversified farm. We run about 40 acres here, primarily focused on honeybees, wellness related to connection with nature. We do maple syrup as well, variety of vegetables, flowers, but our main crop that we grow in addition to honey and maple syrup is lavender. We have a small farm stand here. We also offer apitherapy services such as venom therapy, air therapy with bees, vibrational therapy, so acoustic therapy, and there's a lot of somatic movement around bees as well.
And what are the therapeutic benefits of beekeeping?
So we know nature-based therapies have a huge benefit on our mental wellness, our body wellness, our ability to transition from being out in nature to coming back into our daily life. And working with bees has a tremendous effect on the ability for mindfulness. And that's something that we practice heavily here at the farm ourselves, as well as anybody coming onto the farm, to simply come and be with them in a way that allows us to settle our brains, come into the body, be more mindful with not only nature, not only the bees, but also our partners, our children, our family. And that is really the main benefit about working with bees, the ability to increase mindfulness and allow us to really tap into some of the things that we're always working through in our brains and allow us to come back into our hearts and into our bodies.
And it's fairly counterintuitive, right? Most people, when they think of bees, their heart rate goes up and they think, get me out of here, I don't want to get stung.
One of the things that I take from working with bees all the time is when I'm in the apiary, if I'm not being mindful, if I'm not being present, they're going to let you know by getting a little more aggressive, maybe stinging you. And that's kind of a reminder that, hey, you need to come back. You need to be present with me. We need to be together in this moment. And so those moments in the apiary can be critical times for self-reflection. They can be critical times for really being present. And it is very counterintuitive. You oftentimes think of like being around millions of bees is going to be really stressful. When in actuality, when you really start to become present with those bees, it can be one of the most therapeutic and most meditative experiences that you can possibly do.
What is it about the bees in particular that makes them so therapeutic? Is it the way they engage your senses?
I think that's exactly what it is. It activates all of the senses. When you walk into a bee yard, you have the ability to feel them, to taste what they offer, to hear everything that they offer. The sound of the bees in our therapeutic house, that sound therapy is critical, and it almost brings an immediate calmness to the nervous system. It accentuates the awareness of all of our senses as we're walking in, as we're even just sitting in the field with a lavender plant and all of the bees are buzzing around. But to walk into a building where beehives are there, it is truly impactful to the senses. And that sensory work is everything when it comes to mindfulness.
And then, of course, as you've mentioned, how we use that mindfulness outside the apiary to help us deal with the stresses of our daily lives and to support our overall mental health and well-being. And I know that you've created a program, your Be Calm, Be Well program, that integrates mindfulness practices and beekeeping. And you've seen some really great results.
Yeah, we started working on this probably about 7, 8 years ago, where we started actually developing practices with bees that integrate mindfulness practices or integrate yoga, meditation, or traditional breathing practices, or things that people do in their daily lives that we felt that we could incorporate with bees to actually bring people closer to honeybees. And we ended up partnering with the Department of Veterans Affairs to develop a suite of these practices. We have 10 practices now that we have developed. We did research with the VA on them, and what we saw was a 30% reduction in depression and anxiety of individuals that were participating in these programs at a VA hospital. We published a peer-reviewed paper on it in 2024 that is the first in an English-based journal that demonstrates that using mindfulness practices in conjunction with beekeeping can actually increase dramatically the health benefits of individuals that are using those practices.
So, Adam, you are a fourth-generation U.S. Army veteran and a staunch advocate for agriculture training programs for veterans. Can you share a bit about your own background and the benefits of beekeeping for veterans specifically?
Absolutely. So my journey to beekeeping really began after military service. So I served post 9/11. I got out in 2004. I was active duty Army. I was a Patriot missile fire controller and got hurt during training. And the injury that I had was severe enough to where I couldn't be deployed. So I was given a medical discharge from the Army. When I got out of the Army, it was the height of the opioid epidemic. And so for my injuries, I was being prescribed a heavy dose of opiates. And that became a bit of a problem for me. When I met Lacey in 2005, I was pretty regularly using alcohol and opiates just to make it through the day.
An all too common problem for many people. And of course, veterans are also dealing with that challenging transition from military service to civilian life, where you go from having so much structure to often not at all.
When you leave the military, it is like falling off of a cliff. You leave your family, you leave the men and women that were standing by your side, that were willing to lay their lives down for you, and you go back home. And luckily, I had a family to go home to. I had a lot of battle buddies that didn't have families to go home to. And so when you go through that transitional process, if there's not a support system in place for you when you get home, this is what causes a lot of men and women to take their lives out of the military.
And I know that you and Lacey ultimately decided that it made sense for you to use your GI Bill to go back to school. You had a background in agriculture, so you decided to go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo to get a degree in plant science. And that is where you discovered beekeeping, right?
I took a beekeeping class as an elective, and I remember it vividly. That first time being in the bee yard with 60 hives, hundreds of thousands of bees all around me, it was the first time since I'd left the military where I actually felt like I had to be mindful. I was still fresh out of the military, still thinking about my battle buddies that were overseas fighting Iraq and Afghanistan, thinking about the ones that never came home and dealing with the survivor's guilt. And the bees really forced me to be present and not be thinking about those things.
So very, very impactful for you.
Bees really transformed my entire life.
So you and Lacey developed a program called Heroes to Hives to help veterans with that transition from military service to civilian life. And one of the things I've heard you talk about when discussing Heroes to Hives and beekeeping more generally is the important role that beekeeping and being on a farm can play in bringing families together, and just how important that is for veterans who have often spent a lot of time away from their families.
One of the most important things that we've seen from our program is that because we allow family members to participate, that veteran that may be distant from their family, veterans that have served, and especially those that have served in combat. I have friends that served 5 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they were gone for years, meaning that their kids were being raised and growing up during this time where they were gone. And those familial bonds get really strained between spouses, between children, because of your absence. And then when you come back from combat, you are not the same person. The things you've done, the things you've seen, the things you've experienced change you fundamentally. And so what beekeeping allows this to do when we bring the family together is allows the family to bond around a common interest, around something that everybody's interested in doing together. And it really allows people to come together around these honeybees.
So you're building community.
It's really spectacular, Jessica. Over the years that we've been doing this, every year when we're doing on-ground training, it always starts with everybody so focused on the bees and learning the bees. But by the end of the year, by the end of the field season, the conversations that we start having in the bee yard tend to drift away from honeybees. And it may be something that someone's feeling comfortable enough to open up with because they've been with these people now for 6 months and they've developed a relationship with this community. And now they're willing to open up with something that may be a little harder to talk about than they would with their family or even with a psychologist, because a lot of us feel like some of the things that we've done don't reflect us. There's a lot of moral injury, and sharing those experiences with a stranger can be really tough. And so, I mean, I've had conversations with service members about pretty horrific things that they've seen or had to do or are dealing with in the bee yard because they feel like they can connect and they can open up in that space.
That's such a lovely example of the sense of community and the safe spaces you're creating for people to have those types of honest conversations. So, so important.
You know, I first met Adam at the Agribility Conference, and I heard him talk about the therapeutic power of beekeeping, and I was floored. You can hear it in his voice there that they both are really knowledgeable, really passionate.
One of the things that's really struck me about Lacey and Adam is how beautifully they have integrated their interests and expertise into the work that they do. This wasn't in the clip, but Lacey has a background in transpersonal psychology and 2 decades of experience in somatic therapy and yoga therapy. And Adam, of course, being a 4th-generation veteran and a background in agriculture, they leverage that, all of that, in the work that they do at BeeWise Farms, which I think is just, it's really, you really sense how connected they are and how they bring all these various aspects of themselves to the work that they do, which I think is quite lovely.
Yeah, it was wonderful to listen to them.
So let's jump right to another conversation I had. This one with Shawn Hayden, who is the CEO of GAAMHA in Massachusetts, which offers a wide array of programs, including behavioral health programs for people with substance use and mental health challenges, and enrichment programs for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And Kate, can you tell us a little bit about GAAMHA's care farming program?
They have a residential and day program, and they work with kids and adults who are in recovery from substance use disorder. And at this farm, they're working specifically with rescued farm animals, some that have been really, really mistreated and had some difficult upbringing, like so many of their clients. And I've heard Shawn talk about how people come feeling broken emotionally and physically. And Shawn himself is very open about his past substance use too. And here he is directing this care farm that is offering this connection to these animals who have suffered themselves.
Yeah, and his own background and experiences clearly shape the lens through which he approaches his work today. So here's that clip. So Shawn, I know that GAAMHA provides a whole host of human services programs, but we're going to focus on the behavioral health side of things, and specifically the approach that GAAMHA takes when supporting people with substance use challenges, people in recovery. And I know that GAAMHA does that through a few different programs. So can you describe how care farming fits into that?
So care farming is one of several ways we approach recovery. We have multiple programs. Some are more traditional in their set and setting, but our care farming programs are a little bit newer, and they were sort of happy accidents. We didn't intend to start a care farm. I have no background traditionally in farming. I was kind of terrified of horses and cows, to be honest with you. But what happened was we leased a house because we needed to expand our supportive housing program. Didn't realize when we arrived that the house we're going to see was a farm. We just knew it had a bunch of bedrooms and bathrooms, which was kind of our criteria for congregate care. But when we took over the house, they asked if we could care for the goat and the pony that lived there. I think there was a couple of goats. And we still had no intention of going the farming route.
So what made you decide to establish a care farming program?
We noticed that the people who lived in the house, the ones who spent time with the animals and took up an interest in the farm, had better outcomes. And it was very anecdotal. It was just observational, like, hey, there's something going on here. These guys who are doing this are staying longer. Their outcomes are better. They have a better trajectory in their recovery. And that led to a period of exploration where myself and a colleague did a little bit of research on, are people using farming to help people get better? We really had no baseline information.
I understand why you said happy accident. You kind of stumbled on this.
Yeah, I joked that I kind of Forrest Gumped my way into it. Just sort of happened. And what we found was really fascinating, right? We found out that this care farming concept had been around for centuries and that people were using it for a number of different populations to support them and help them and heal and rehabilitate. But what we didn't find were a lot of care farms using that modality to support people with substance use disorder. So we were able to identify the other programs throughout New England, and we did a bunch of site visits and we learned some incredible information. But the two takeaways every time we went was either they didn't really do anything for people with substance use, or they were the exclusive domain of people with significant needs. So they either had high-end commercial PPO insurance plans, or they had private family funding to allow them to attend. And our agency really exclusively served people with low and no income.
And I know that through a lot of very out-of-the-box thinking, you were eventually able to license your farm as a substance use disorder treatment center. So that treatment is covered through Medicaid. No small feat, I'm sure, but you pulled it off. And what does your care farming program look like today?
So in 2020, we purchased this new property. In 2021, we opened this current version of the farm, which is called the Carl E. Dahl House at Evergreen Grove. It's a 16-bed licensed substance use treatment facility for men with co-occurring substance use and mental health conditions. And their care is 100% covered by Mass Health, which is our state Medicaid system. So no one pays $1 to attend treatment there. And the average length of stay is 6 to 12 months. So it's a really robust, long-term, at its core, it's a clinical treatment program, but it's in this really unique setting where we're able to weave our care farming modality into all of the clinical requirements that our state and Medicaid require to reimburse for this kind of care.
And that unique setting is a 115-acre equestrian estate where you now have a lot more than a pony and 2 goats. You now have goats, horses, pigs, chickens. I believe there was a donkey in one of the pictures I saw on your website. So residents have access to both a team of substance use professionals, and they also get to experience that sense of purpose that comes from taking care of these other living beings. So Shawn, you have a really powerful connection to GAAMHA, starting as a patient in recovery yourself at GAAMHA's Pathway House, which is a residential treatment program for adult men. Can you share a bit about your own story and how you ended up at Pathway House?
Yeah, so my life has been a series of ups and downs for sure. I started out my professional life right out of high school, and I had some success early on. I had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit and did pretty well early in life. But in my early 20s, I had a back injury that led to a prescription for an opioid from a very well-intentioned family practitioner. And this was in the mid-90s, so people were really hip to what would be the opioid epidemic that was coming up. But when I tried opioids, it took hold very quickly. I remember the first time taking opioids, I felt like every problem I'd ever had been solved instantly. And it was a battle that I was able to hide in private for several years until it escalated to a point where I couldn't hide it any longer. And I went through several years of fighting the fight. I went on tour around the country to different rehab centers and programs. And my path was a familiar one where I started out at nice treatment centers on the beach in Florida. And by the end, it was public detoxes. And my last couple of detox episodes happened in a county jail cell. Mm-hmm. And so I had a pretty precipitous drop from that early promise.
So you entered Pathway House on June 4th, 2009. You'd been to several other rehab centers and programs, but nothing really worked. You were estranged from your wife and young son. You've described the way you felt at that time as broken and defeated, with not even a speck of confidence that you could get better. But at Pathway House, something clicked. And you've shared with me that a big part of that was that the folks there were just brutally honest with you, didn't try to dress it up, just told you very directly exactly what to do.
Yeah. I had really kind of resigned myself that I was going to die from this disease. And it was baby steps. It was a lot of work, but through really no volition of my own, just following directions, my life got better. And eventually I was able to reconcile with my wife and my son and reunite our family, which for me, I'm incredibly blessed because that's not the typical outcome for people in my position. Most people aren't able to repair those relationships, or they don't get the opportunity to do that. But lo and behold, here we are 16 years later, and I have a beautiful life with my family. My wife, my son's 20 years old, and he's a great kid, and we have an incredible life together. But it all started there.
And of course, that experience not only got you back on your feet so you could reunite with your family, it also inspired you to embark on a new career path, helping others in recovery. And after much persistence, you were able to land a job at Pathway House at GAAMHA, where you started at the bottom and climbed your way up the ladder, and of course, eventually, in 2024, became CEO. So when you were in recovery back in 2009, there was no Care Farm program at GAAMHA. But thanks to the happy accident you described earlier, there is now. So looking through the lens of that person who entered Pathway House in 2009 and went through that program with much success, what additional benefit do you think the care farming program could have provided? And how does that inform your perspective today?
I think a lot of rehabilitation programs make a really significant mistake almost on day one. And I had this experience myself as I would go in and out of rehab programs, which is you arrive at this treatment center. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of intake processes. Your head's all over the place because you're just coming off of your substance or whatever. And they all say the same thing. They say, Shawn, you need to learn how to love yourself. Right, which is a true statement, right? We should all learn how to love ourselves. But in that moment, I remember thinking, I just stole my grandmother's toaster like 2 weeks ago. I haven't talked to my son in 3 months. I haven't paid a bill in over a year. You want me to love myself? I'm not lovable, right? And in that moment, I don't know how lovable I was. We don't ask that question. All we do is we say, Jessica, welcome to the Carl Dollhouse. Here's what I need you to do. And we'll grab a baby goat or a pony and we'll say, I need you to love Lola. And Jessica goes, I think I can do that, you know? And then we just let you do that for a period of time. And we tell you how to care for your animal. We go through all the safety and health issues, and we'll let Jessica do that for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. And then we'll pause and we'll go, can we just review what just happened? You showed up here. You learned about this animal. You cared for it day and night. If it was winter, you got up in the middle of the night, went and broke up water and added extra hay to the stall. The animal's thriving in your care. Boy, that sounds pretty lovable, doesn't it?
Wow.
You were responsible, you were accountable, you gave service to another living being. How do you feel about yourself now? You know, and at that point, people can go, maybe I have some value. Maybe there's something in me that's worth saving. So I think that's one of many examples. The other thing is that when a new person, we welcome to the farm, and we always start off with a tour, and we walk into the barn for the first time, and these people come in with some of them have really incredible history. We've had certainly people who have been criminal justice involved. They've been chronically homeless. We recently had a young man who was a refugee from Liberia who was a child soldier. And they have these incredibly just dark and terrible backgrounds. When you walk into a barn, all of that disappears. Mm-hmm. Whatever you offer those animals in that moment is what they return back to you. They don't care about any of those things. And in a lot of times, that relationship you form with that animal is the most honest relationship you've had maybe in decades. Because when you're active in substance use, and I'll use myself as an example, when I would enter a room, I always felt like my addiction walked into the room about 10 seconds before I did. because I looked the part, right? And I had a reputation I'd earned in my community. And everyone who interacted with me filtered that interaction through that information. So there was never really a genuine welcome. It was like, hey, I know Shawn. Here's Shawn. He's the guy with all the problems.
Right.
And the animals, they don't have that filter. It's the most honest relationship you can have. And that can be so profound for someone. I mean, the bonds the guys form with the animals happen so quickly, and they're intense bonds, right? Because for the first time, they're just getting back what they give. And like I said, sometimes it's been so long since they've had that kind of interaction. It's really remarkable. And it teaches them that they can form relationships again.
Wow, that's so, so powerful. And I'm a horse person myself, and am so grateful for the lack of judgment from the horses I have loved throughout my life. You know, it's part of our human condition that we judge each other, when often we have no idea what someone's going through. Whereas, as you said, the animals accept you as you are.
That's right.
So, Shawn, let's pivot a little bit. And can you tell us what role the Care Farming Network has played in Dollhouse's success? And why is it so important to be part of a network of care farmers?
I can't overstate how important being a part of the Care Farming Network is, really, because I think if you talk to any care farming provider, and I know this because we had our first national conference last year, and we all from all over the country got together in a room, and it was amazing to hear everyone tell the same story. I think anyone who gets into this, their passion drives them into the work, and probably they've seen some indicators that the work is going to be impactful, but everyone feels alone. Before the Care Farming Network, there's really no coalescing body to pull all these folks together to develop best practices and share resources and learn from one another. And that's the part that's been incredibly important, because we're experts in substance use treatment and mental health support and different things. We're not expert farmers. I mean, we're probably more expert than we were 7 or 8 years ago, but the connections we form, and then you find out, oh my gosh, there's another one. They're only a couple hours away. We can visit each other, and that piece of it. And I think just validation from one another that the struggle is universal in some of these things. And we've all made enough mistakes and bumped our head enough times that as new care farmers come into the fold, we can say, okay, here's what we're going to tell you before you even get started. Don't do X, Y, Z. Definitely do this over here, and spare them some of the heartburn that maybe some of us experienced as we were breaking the mold, so to speak. And I think the future for the work is really exciting. Now there's a real spotlight on this. I think for a time, this work was seen as kind of a cutesy, hokey, woo-woo kind of approach. But I think there's enough data coming out now to say, no, this is an impactful and valid service delivery modality that can be applied to multiple populations. And we learn from our partner farms who work with people with developmental disabilities and people who work with psychiatry, reentry, whatever it may be. This approach works for people. And the Care Farming Network is really that coalescing body that brings all these incredible people together to learn from each other, to help each other get better and share resources. And it's just so important that they're there. And we're just so thrilled to be a part of the network.
We did not pay Shawn to say that.
Send him a check now.
I could listen to Shawn all day long.
Yes, so much knowledge, plus the hard-earned wisdom derived from his own recovery journey. And I'm really glad that Shawn spoke about the important role that animals can play in people's recovery. And of course, he did that so eloquently.
I've heard Shawn talk about people first coming to the farm who they might not talk to a therapist for like a week. Instead, they're out in a barn and they are just spending time with some recovered horse or an animal who does not see them as people with addiction. But you're also providing somebody who might not have been very responsible for themselves this gift to be responsible for another creature. And they only have to be together in that present moment. And those exchanges is what begins to build resilience in ways that it can be kind of hard to explain, but really powerful to witness that connection.
Absolutely. And of course, Shawn also made it very clear the tremendous value he sees in being part of the Care Farming Network.
2 things that I think about after hearing those clips. One is that care farming is about building community well-being. And yet, before Red Wiggler, before Woody, before Andrea started Care Farming Network, there was no community for care farmers. So how do you build community well-being in a vacuum with no support from other people? So if there's one movement that really does need a body to help people network and connect, who are trying to themselves provide network and connection to the people on their farms. I'm very proud that Care Farming Network is it.
So important. You had your first annual conference this past January in Massachusetts. And one of the things that really struck me when doing my research, and Shawn alluded to this, was the incredible response you got from everyone who attended.
I think one of the most powerful examples of why we have this in-person only conference where hundreds of people come together and spend 3 days together is because what we heard from people was that it was so delightful to be in a space with other people who just get it right from the jump, right? The camaraderie is great, all of that. But one person said to me, I never once had to explain what it was I was trying to do to anybody in the room. And thank you for that.
Oh, that's lovely.
I've been in nonprofit work for 22 years. My own personal experience is I have never felt the type of energy that I felt at that conference. There were hugs, there were tears, there's a farm tour where we all got to celebrate, and we were fast friends right out of the gate.
Well, and that makes sense because people who'd had to figure everything out on their own for so long, finally finding this network, it's like discovering the family you never knew you had. So Adam and Lacey and Shawn talked about the impact of their programs and some of the data that supports that. Adam mentioned a paper published in 2024 that demonstrates the health benefits of combining mindfulness practices and beekeeping. Shawn mentioned the better outcomes of people who cared for the animals at their care farm. And actually, one of the things you didn't hear in that clip, but Shawn talks about it in the full interview, is that a vet student from Penn actually did a study looking at the impact to the goats of participating in the program at Dollhouse and found that the goats experienced positive health outcomes. So really wonderful to hear that. So Kate, let's talk about the research and scientific data behind care farming more broadly. And first of all, how do you measure the effectiveness of care farming and the impact it's having?
I think that is such an important question because one of the things that people often ask is, how do you know care farming works? And short answer is we measure it in a lot of the same ways that you'd measure any other therapeutic intervention. Researchers look at mental health outcomes like reduction in stress, anxiety, depression, or they track physical health markers like blood pressure or cortisol and even improved mobility. With care farming, you're also looking at improving social outcomes. You're asking questions. Are people building relationships? Do people feel a greater sense of belonging? Are they gaining skills that translate into employment or independence? And here in the US, we are still building the evidence base and relying largely on international research, especially in Europe, where care farming is more established, which is showing really strong results. Studies in the Netherlands, studies in the UK, for example, have found a lot of improvements in mental health and resilience and social inclusion. And so what we at CFN right now are doing is curating that data. We share it with care farmers. If you go into our online resource library, there's a whole section on research that you can look up. And one of our big ideas actually is to develop a care farm journal, a place where science and stories meet. It would be a repository to share research on how farms support mental health and healing, but alongside it, it would have real voices and experiences from care farmers and the folks that they serve too. So that's in development now.
I love that. Putting the quantitative and qualitative data side by side. So you've got the facts as well as the emotion, both so important. So Kate, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, you and your wife Amy moved from a very large metropolitan city to a rural farm in Ashby, Minnesota in 2020. And I know that a desire to reconnect with nature was a big part of that decision. So is there a takeaway here for society generally, beyond just care farms? In this age of social media, technology, and artificial intelligence, always being connected through technology, but maybe not so connected to nature and to each other.
Absolutely, there's a takeaway. Because even if someone never sets foot on a care farm, people need connection. And real human connection. And nature is one of the best teachers of that. I think care farming reminds us of something kind of very ancient and yet very simple, that tending the land and tending people and tending ourselves all go hand in hand. And you don't have to run a care farm to carry that lesson, because it could be as small as growing a tomato plant on your balcony, or sharing food with a neighbor, or just spending time outdoors with someone else. And I think that what care farming shows us is that healing and belonging and connectivity and community are possible when we slow down and we step outside and we reconnect with what's real. Because if we can learn to care for the land and care for each other and care for animals at the same time, I believe that that changes everything.
Slow down and reconnect with what's real, the land, the animals, and each other. Very simple and yet quite profound, actually. And very different, certainly, from scrolling through the curated posts we so often see on social media. So the Care Farming Network's vision is to have a care farm in every county, in every state. Assuming that vision came to fruition, what possibilities do you imagine for individuals, for communities, and for the way we care for one another?
First and foremost, folks would have access to care farms. Access is important. We would see care integrated in agriculture. We would see more intersectionality. We'd see more social inclusion. We would see more hope and options for people to have either job skill training or employment. And I, for one, would like to imagine a day that we don't have to describe care farming to the average person, and that it is just this given that care farms exist and people support them, and there is a care farm in your backyard.
And Woody, how about you?
I think that the potential for the Care Farming Network and the aspiring care farmers and the established care farmers is that we can position ourselves as real leaders in reform of everything. Bigger is not necessarily better, that small organizations thrive and are a magnet for community development. And care farms in every county will be an example of the strength of smallness, of aspirations that are incremental, that build up over time and are not immediate. We live in an immediate culture these days. And bringing us back to this idea that the little things that we do add up to be something really big. And the distribution of care farms throughout the country, throughout North America, throughout really the world, because there are examples across the world. They just don't call themselves care farms yet. But to highlight the small things that get done every day and to build up more of these small things so that over time it becomes a big thing and we change the systems that many of us feel are broken today.
So in this world of mega mergers, you've reminded us that bigger isn't always better, and that sometimes the small things can actually have a very big impact. So we need to start winding down, but I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to share any final thoughts about why you believe care farms are so essential and what being involved in this work has meant to you personally.
I look at tending the land as tending spirit, my own spirit and other people's spirit. And when I care for my animals and when I care for my soil and my gardens, I just feel more connected. And I think there's so much disconnection within ourselves personally and within the greater community that needs mending. So I think care farms do this. They reconnect us to ourselves and they reconnect us to others in this really primal kind of way that took me 50 years to find. But once I found it, I'm like, I don't want to let go of this. I believe in it beyond 100%.
A lot of passion there. Thank you, Kate. And now, Woody, let's turn to you. Looking back over the last 30 years, did you ever imagine that starting out working on a day program to grow vegetables would turn into the care farming movement that exists today? And what has all of this meant to you personally?
Well, personally, it gives to me what we hope that others experience, which is a sense of meaning in my life. And that is a short statement, but it is a very profound one. I feel very fortunate to have such a meaningful job and interesting people to work with. And it's expanded so far from the concept I had originally. So my days are infused with meaning. Sometimes I need somebody like you to remind me of that.
It's a big part of why I do this podcast, highlighting my guest stories and hopefully making you feel seen and heard provides a sense of meaning for me. So I'm very grateful for that. Okay, so we are out of time, but before I let you go, Kate, Woody, are there any resources you'd like to share? And how can people find out more about the Care Farming Network?
The best place to learn about Care Farming Network, including our member care farms, is our website, which is carefarmingnetwork.org. And you can find a map and directory, events, social channels. You find us in all the places that you would expect to find on a website. We do have a newsletter every month that gets sent out. Easy to sign up for that. And we are going to be hosting our second national conference, February 9th through the 11th. Red Wiggler Care Farm is hosting.
And that's in Central Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C.
And we should mention that registration is currently open for that. Also a reminder that you can find the full versions of my interviews with Adam and Lacey Ingrao and Shawn Hayden on our website at reimaginationcafe.com or reimaginingtheworkplace.net. So I'd encourage folks to check those out. Kate, Woody, I want to thank you so much. You've been so generous, both of you, with your time. We've had a lot of conversations. You've introduced me to all these other wonderful care farmers. This has been a wonderful learning experience for me, and I've enjoyed meeting you both so much. Thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for joining me here at the ReImagination Cafe.
Thank you, too, for being a part of introducing this work to others. And you've just been wonderful to work with, too.
You know, I don't often take the time to think back like you've encouraged us to think back. And it makes me emotional to think about what's ahead. You know, it's in a time like now when things are challenging, there's positive stories out there. And thank you for bringing the care farming story to light.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely been my pleasure. Okay, a big thank you to Kate Mudge, Woody Woodroof, Lacey and Adam Ingrao, Shawn Hayden, and Charley Schwartz for joining me for these very inspiring conversations. That's it for this episode of the ReImagination Cafe. You can now connect with us on Instagram at ReImagination Cafe and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ReImagination Cafe. I'm Jessica Cherry. As always, thanks so much for listening.